I say we don't do a lot of bio. I am going to do a little bio in terms of setting the table tonight, just because we do have the space for that. And we're going to do a full length bio on Madonna. I believe either Like a Virgin or Like a Prayer, right? Is where it's full bio. But we're doing the self-titled, the debut tonight, when Madonna was still just a New York City club kid who wanted to be a ballerina, and fell into New York City life. And next thing you know, she's the biggest female pop star of the 80s.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the narrative, because I think pretty famously, Madonna was an art school kid, from Michigan. She spent some time at the University of Michigan before cast, like many did, especially though back when you did it in the 70s and 80s, right? I just felt like there's another layer of gravitas, right, that New York had when you moved there in I guess the 60s too, because you had Greenwich Village and stuff. But I feel like the 70s and the 80s, right, was like dirtier and grittier, right? So
Right,
if you
that
went, you
era,
like embrace it, yeah.
yeah, that era Blondie and all of that, when it was still a city on the rise, I think.
Yeah, just it's there's so many different things about that, the blackouts and
Son
just
of
the
Sam.
grit and the
Son of-
crime and the porno stores, right, that were there. There was always all that different stuff, right? And so I think by the time the 90s come, like it's like that Giuliani broken windows era, and then even like when there's a renaissance in the early 2000s, it's definitely like a safer New York, right? Which is not a bad thing, but like Madonna is embracing the idea of going to that fully multicultural, dangerous, edgy New York at the age of 19, and she does. And her original goal, as I mentioned before, is to be a ballet dancer. She works with a pretty famous choreographer named Alvin Ailey. She also, basically like a lot of people, does odd jobs in New York, right? Some of them artistic, some of them, retail slash, waitressy type stuff. And then, of course, like as New York was, everything blends together. She did do some modeling, including some risque modeling, of course, that obviously came back. I think it was supposed to be like came back to embarrass her in like 1985, with like a Playboy centerfold. But of course, knowing what we know about Madonna, you know what I mean? It takes a lot more than just that, you know what I mean? I mean, heck, 5 years later, she was 5 to 7 years later, right? She was cashing in on it with her own coffee table book with her own type of different stuff that was probably more edgy than anything there. So she eventually becomes a part of something called the Patrick Hernandez Review. It's like a disco group, which kind of tracks even for what we're going to talk about tonight. They have a minor hit called Born to Be Alive. She's bouncing around. She meets a gentleman by the name of Dan Gilroy, who she dates for quite a while. And he forms a band with her called the Breakfast Club. Eventually another ex-boyfriend, this one from Michigan, who becomes like a long-term collaborator by the name of Stephen Bray. He is the drummer of that group. Eventually, I think things break off between Madonna and Gilroy, and also Madonna and Bray break off to kind of do some producing of their own tracks. While this is going on, Madonna's sort of also in the club scene and kind of, as we will talk about, I'm sure, extensively, Madonna kind of is a tastemaker to some degree for years, decades even. And one of the things she first got in there was, as being in the club scene and kind of knowing that multicultural club vibe. She makes a demo tape of some of the stuff that she and Bray do, and it ends up in the hands of a gentleman by the name of Mark Cammons, who is a producer, DJ, all kinds of different stuff. He gets the tape to Sire Records, and they sign Madonna in 1982. This is around the time when the song Everybody comes out and becomes a hit. That song actually was created and kind of had its breakthrough in 82, so a year ahead of this. The song that also ends up on this Physical Attraction also gets a club hit. Kind of interestingly, it's similar, Josh, to like what we talked about with hip-hop, that these songs were circulating in the culture, right, before they ever broke mainstream. Although some of the hip-hop we were talking about didn't necessarily break mainstream in the way that like Madonna did, right? But then this album is recorded. Pretty famously, Madonna did not like the original recording, so she gets it in the hands of the wonderfully named Jelly Bean Benitez, who was also her lover at the time. Madonna did seem to mix business and pleasure here during this era quite a bit.
Yeah.
And she releases this self-titled debut album in September of 1983, and it features 2 top 10 hits and 5 singles. Want to take a gander at which 2 songs, Josh, were the top 10 hits?
Well, I would imagine that it was probably Holiday and...
Holiday was a top 40 hit, but not a top 10 hit.
Oh, wow. Well, I like Burning Up. Was that a top 10
Burning
hit?
Up was a single, but it was not a top 10. Nope.
Well, I'm bad at this then.
Yeah.
Is it I don't know. You tell me.
Borderline was a top 10 hit, and the
Okay.
highest charting song on the album was Lucky Star, which
Oh,
was
okay.
number 4. And actually, Madonna would go on a run starting with Borderline, which was not the first song released off of it. Everybody was, and some other songs. But once Borderline hit the top 10, her next 17 singles hit the top 10, which is pretty remarkable.
Yep.
So we'll leave it there, and whoever gets to pick up Madonna in terms of talking about her, not, pick her up,
Yes.
is going to be able to talk about her, I think, in the context of Like a Virgin, which was the one that broke Madonna from big to big.
Yes.
But today, we're just going to talk about the self-titled. Thoughts, Josh?
Well, first of all, we're not going to be doing a full bio on her until Like a Prayer in 1989. Looks like going to
okay.
be our second to last show of the 80s, or second to last proper episode. And we're not covering Like a Prayer, actually. So if you're interested in that, listen.
You mean Like a Virgin? Or
Yes, Like a
Oh,
Virgin.
okay, wow. Okay, yeah.
Listen on your own to fill in that gap. And then let's do some stats, too, before I give my thoughts.
I like it.
We've got Madonna's by Madonna, released in 1983. It is the 22nd highest ranked album of 1983. It is the 217th highest album of the 80s. Madonna is ranked in her overall artists. She is ranked 644. 179 in the overall artist rankings, with that arbitrary ranking. And this album is her 4th best according to Best Ever Albums, with Ray of Light, Like a Prayer, and True Blue ahead of this, and Like a Virgin right behind it.
And I know we cover Like a Prayer, and I know we cover
Ray of Light.
Ray of Light. We do, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we cover
In the
True
90s.
Blue?
Nope, that's another one that
okay.
we will not cover.
My sister covered True Blue every day, I think, of my childhood for a good 6-month stretch, so I know that album front, back, and beyond. But how do we encompass early Madonna, Josh? Where do you want to start with Madonna?
I love early Madonna. I think it's
Okay.
just and I love this album. I think it's a perfect pop record. It is, we've had post-punk. I feel like this is post-disco. Definitely firmly in the dance-based club scene in this album. Every track is like a dance track pretty much. I think they made extended versions of some of these songs on some of the releases to keep it on the dance floor even longer. I think they did that with Holiday or Lucky Star.
Yeah, I felt like a couple of these songs were much longer than the versions you would have heard on MTV or on the radio that I grew up with. Yeah,
for sure. And every song has a really catchy hook. It's real synth based and drum machine based, and I think there's some probably electric piano on here or keyboards.
Definitely
as well.
drum and bass for sure.
Yeah, and that's really like the key to making this a good dance album.
And synth, I should mention too.
Yes.
Especially early 80s synth for sure.
Yes, for sure. Yep, it's got these infectious beats to them, and then she's got her great singing overlaid with them, and they just make perfect dance tracks. They're so fun to sing along to. They have they have catchy or choruses as well, infectious, and it's only 8 songs, the original album, and I feel like every song is good to great. There's no really bad ones. I think they're a little formulaic in terms of the structure, and there's a lot of repetition, but I had a real good time listening to it. It's such an easy listen. It reminds me a lot of the Cyndi Lauper album in terms of just really well done, really well sung, well crafted, and I've definitely heard this album before, but it's been a while, and it puts Madonna on that great like start. It's not like fully formed Madonna yet, but you can definitely see all of the elements are there. And then I think when she starts kind of striking out in terms of, expanding getting away from the fully dance focused nature of her songs into more pop oriented and maybe a bit more complex themes, but I think the foundation is here, and you can see what makes her special on this album.
Yeah, I want to mention that 3 things that are used extensively in this that kind of go along with what we talked about. There's the Linn drum machine, which is extremely recognizable sonically in the early 80s. Yeah, it's I actually, believe it or not, I know this one pretty. I think it didn't have a very long lifespan, if I remember correctly, like 5 years or 6 years before it got displaced by other drum machines. But it's a very distinct drum sound.
Yes.
And I'm looking now for the other 2 sets. The Moog bass.
Yeah.
Josh.
Yes.
The Moog bass so we said bass and drum, right? It's coming from the Moog bass and the Linn drum machine, and then there's the infamous OBX synthesizer as well, another like colossal 80s thing. So I mean, Madonna's kind of at the front end of this, but these become ubiquitous in the 80s. So that's
It's good to see Moog is still producing instruments. I know we talked about them a lot in the 60s and 70s.
They were damn near a Hall of Famer in the 60s. And then in the 70s, outside of a little bit of prog, right, they kind of disappeared. So good for Moog for coming back. But yeah, the thing that really strikes me about this Madonna, and I think this is a very enjoyable album. She would do better work, I think, later in the 80s. And we're not going to cover that. But I mean, full cards ahead, I think like a Virgin and True Blue are stronger albums than this in terms of like the highs might be a little bit higher. With that being said, 2 of my all-time favorite Madonna songs from just to put me in a good mood are Dress You Up and Borderline, right? Those are 2 songs. I think one time somebody said Borderline's the Madonna song that even people that don't like Madonna like, and there's some truth to it because it's such an interesting way of saying like about a relationship, right? Because that's what all these songs are about. They're like relationship songs, and Madonna's still very much a fascinating synthesis of like disco, but looking like 80s New York.
Yep.
And this is where Madonna still belongs to New York more than she belongs to the world at this point. And I think that's why I always am particularly drawn to this Madonna, because there's just some, Madonna can never be accused of being, like a babe in the woods, right? And I would say for most of her career, she was pretty calculating too. I mean, she was ahead of the curve most of the time, but there was a calculation to what she was doing, which all great artists have, right? I think at this thing, she was sort of effortlessly, ahead of the curve as opposed to calculated ahead of the curve. She was still hungry. She was still a little bit desperate in the way that like, almost like a punk band was, or like the Saturday Night Fever, like John Travolta, character. It's like you kind of came from like these small town, roots. In her case, I think Bay City was where she was from, Michigan. So kind of like a, kind of a Midwest,
the rags to riches
blue collar town.
Trying to reinvent yourself,
but then you become the star of the club, right? Like you become like a sex symbol who's got your own style and just like a grit to it. And the other thing, of course, is Madonna's brand of feminism was a different type of feminism, right? Than even what like say Cyndi Lauper's was. That we were talking about, or of course certainly like mainstream stuff. So I find it, and I know we talked about I oftentimes will compare Madonna to Bowie in some ways, in that they were often, for a long period of time, they managed to beat back the idea of getting caught by the trends, and they kind of were able to put themselves in the trends. But I think one thing that both of them have in common for me is that it's almost impossible for me to think of them without thinking about like what stage of their career they're in.
Right.
So, and throughout the 80s, there's all these different, Madonna characters. There's like 7 different distinct Madonna characters I can think of, right? With this being still, I think, the only one that was at the time like less a character and more just, what Madonna was. But yeah, it's a ton of songs that you probably are familiar with, right? Like Lucky Star, yes. Everybody, Borderline, Dress You Up. I mean, these are all songs that, were on the radio extensively. They are not overly complex. They're danced up, disco songs, kind of moved in with 80s synth. That's really the big difference, is instead of just drum and bass, there's now synth.
Just a slight correction. You keep mentioning Dress You Up, and I just want to point out that song.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Like a Virgin.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to say Burnin' Up.
Got it. Yep.
So I'm sorry. I keep saying Dress instead of. So I apologize.
Also a good song though.
Yes, it is. It is a great song. Yeah, and it's a shame we're not going to be covering Like a Virgin. But yeah, this one's definitely a thumbs up. I always love to see an artist before they truly hit it big, and they're ascending. And this is kind of like Madonna in the formative years, and I really enjoyed it. I know we're not talking a lot about the music itself, and I think that the reason is because it's pretty standard issue. Good, solid dance pop, grounded. And even the versions of this, as we mentioned before, are long, just like we talked about with disco, right? And I would argue that the singles, the shortened version of them, for my taste, are better synthesis of what we're going for. Because I think some of these songs could be taken down to like 3.5 minutes instead of like the disco extension, 5.5 minutes, and it takes out some of the repetition and just makes them a little bit tighter. I mean, it does make it a little bit more, chorus, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, all this, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, all that good stuff, structure. Whereas this is a little bit more free form, but yeah, thumbs up for me for sure.
Thumbs up for me. And also Matt was kind enough to write his notes out for us. Right. So okay. Matt's take on this is,
are you going to talk as Matt, like try to take on a voice, or are you
I'm going to read what he wrote.
I wish you like would record it and then in the editing like put on like auto tune or something to read it. So yeah.
But, yeah. Well, so Matt wasn't as high as this on this album as we were. He said, how we often say that we're amazed that a certain album was a debut album because it's so good. Well, this one, he said, sounds like what you'd expect a debut album to sound like.
That's not altogether unfair.
No. Yeah. Her singles are great, but the other tracks are pretty basic dance tracks with predictable rhymes all about love. It's fine and at times pretty fun, but kind of forgettable in the long run. His favorite song on
can you be forgettable if you have 4 singles on an album? I get what he's saying, but it's kind of,
the whole front side is pretty like unimpeachable.
I wouldn't go so far as to say unimpeachable, but yeah, there's a lot of. I think I've resided in between both. Yeah, I reside in between Matt's like meh, and you're like
gushing.
I'm next in line to bask in Madonna's glory.
I'm burning up for Madonna. What can I say?
You are, yeah.
His favorite track on here is Borderline. It has a really good descending chord progression in the chorus. He's thumbs in the middle overall.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I'm glad he mentioned the descending chord progression, because earlier I said like I like the structure of the song, and that's what I was referring to in the structure, that descending chorus. So thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Ghost of Matt.
The voice of reason.
The voice of reason. Yeah. My only complaint would be songs like, as I mentioned before, Lucky Star, Borderline, and Holiday are all chalking in at the lowest at 520, the highest 610. All of these songs would have been better as 3.5 to 4 minute songs, and you know how I know that, because they give me Burn Up at 3 minutes and 45 seconds, and I think it snaps off the page when it comes in quite a bit. So yeah, and in like songs like Physical Attraction that aren't as strong, that 6 minutes and 39 seconds really starts to feel a little bit lengthy. So
although I do like I Know It's chorus. I think that's really great. And Think of Me, that backing beat reminds me of that song Forget Me Nots. Do you know that?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's like the same
Yeah.
exact tempo or whatever. It's just like later used in the Men in Black theme song, but it's once you hear it, I like couldn't get it out of my head.
Yes.
So the comparison.
That's yeah. You know what? The more I think about it, Josh, yeah, you're right on that.
Yeah, go
That's
back
so
and listen to it, and then
Mm-hmm.
listen to the other song, and it sounds exactly the same. That part. So
Well, how about
unintentional, maybe, but
that? Or
interesting.
subconsciously intentional. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
What was it, like that Led Zeppelin thing we did, right? Where he wrote the same thing as somebody's like, I never heard it. It just
Yeah.
crossed in my brain. So,
Yep.
Okay, so big thumbs up for Josh. Relatively robust thumbs up for me, and thumbs in the middle for Matt. Fair enough. I mean, we're going to talk about Madonna down the road, and it's impossible to talk about the 80s, or for that matter, pop culture of the last 30 years. I mean, like everyone in pop, it's, I don't feel like Madonna gets talked about as much anymore. But isn't that kind of the life of every pop star to some degree? Like that, a couple generations out, you're there. But it is a little weird to me that people, kind of don't talk. Probably like the fact that she's still around trying to connect through Instagram. Some might say uncomfortably, but
And putting out albums too, right?
and putting out albums, that actually are not too poorly reviewed either. So I would be lying if I said I gave hard listens to her stuff of the last 10 years. But, before we do Like a Prayer, I might do that just to kind of see, what we're looking at. But I'm pretty well familiar with Madonna all the way through the early 2000s. So,
Yeah, same.
we'll
I think I probably stopped at Ray of Light, honestly.